Hi guys, it's Iain Davies here. I'm making this video for the interest of Black Zombie 81 YouTube channel. He asked me in response to one of my recent videos what my top 10 favorite metal bands are. So I'm going to make this a two-parter. I'm going to do 5 and 5, starting with my least favorite of the 10 and going to my most favorite of the 10. And yeah, so we'll see how it goes. The top 5 are easier than the top 10, so the lower 5 is a bit harder, and I should preempt this by saying I chose these based on not what one band in terms of my favorite album was, but maybe in terms of the bands I bought the most albums from and that I've listened to a collective amount of albums than most. So that's how I'm going to do this. So we'll start with number 10. 10 was really hard, but I'm going to go with an old classic. Slayer is probably one of my favorite metal bands ever, and I've also picked 3 records for each band I'm going to mention. I'm going to mention 3 records per band. So for Slayer, my number 3, right now I'm at Seasons in the Abyss. In the Abyss is probably my 3rd favorite album, Slayer album, that I have. So yeah, Seasons of the Abyss is cool. It's kind of got a progressive nature to it, which I like. It's, you know, the song, there's a lot more variety to it. The production I'm not that big on, even though Andy Wallace produced it, who's a legend. But there's not a lot of bass in it, and the guitar tone's a little bit weak compared to what my favorite metal album is from Slayer. So for number 2, which was actually the first album I ever got, was South of Heaven, which is production. Once again, not as my favorite production in the world, but once again a bit more varied, kind of like Seasons in the Abyss was, you know, with slow and fast and really kind of catchy riffs. So it's just an awesome album, and it's a good sort of way to differentiate from the other albums, or the album that came before it, which was of course my favorite album, and a cliche I know, but Rain and Blood. But production on this one is amazing. The guitar tone is just so awesome, so chuggy and so saturated, which is the thing I think I missed about the other 3 albums, the other 2, sorry. And you know, it's good if you need an album to listen to in 29 minutes. You know, this is your game. So that's probably my favorite Slayer album of all time. After them, coming to number 9, gonna go with Cannibal Corpse. Cannibal Corpse is probably another one of my favorite bands of all time, but number 9. In terms of my 3 favorite albums from them, one I got recently, Bloodlust. The production is awesome because it's done by Colin Richardson, and it's just because of that it makes it great joy to listen to. And I'm probably a bigger fan of the songs that they wrote with the Corpse Grinder era, just because they kept getting more catchy. And just a bit more memorable sort of than the first 3 albums. So that's my 3rd favorite album from Cannibal Corpse. The Bleeding is probably my 2nd favorite album. Once again, production not as big a fan of as Bloodlust. Bloodlust is probably my favorite Cannibal Corpse production. But it's still good, and it does lend itself, that Scott Burns kind of production does lend itself to that old Tampa, Florida sound, obviously because he created it, and it does kind of bring you to that era of death metal, so that's really cool. But once again, I mean, there's just so many catchy riffs that are more melodic than, say, the first 3 albums. And then my favorite album, I'm going to say Evisceration Plague. That was, I think, probably the 2nd album I ever got from them, maybe the 3rd, I'm not sure. But every song is just, it's a combination of sort of what those two albums are. Really catchy, but just blind-numbingly heavy as hell, and it's just so technical and so aggressive, and I almost haven't bothered to learn anything from this album. I'm going to try and attempt Priest of Sodom at some point when I get the time, or when I can be asked to do it. Right, after them, I don't have all 3 records, all 3 of my favorite records here, but Annihilator is probably my number 8. So my 3rd favorite record from them would probably be, I'm going to say, just off the top of my head, the new one, the self-titled one. I liked Metal and I liked Schizo Deluxe, but I think just overall the new album or the latest one is just a lot more well-rounded and just a bit more of a solid album in terms of lyrical stuff, songwriting, riff writing, and all that. And it has 66 solos. You can't beat that. Second favorite album is Alice in Hell, a classic. Just, you know, really technical kind of album, really progressive. Just, I think that they were just really different compared to what most thrash metal bands were doing, which was just all kind of fast, tremolo picking-esque stuff. But they kind of really, I think, set themselves apart with the more progressive technical aspect. And my number one, which I don't have with me here, it's in Bristol, is Never Never Land, which is obviously the follow-up to that one. And it's just that one is similar to Alice in Hell, but the songs are just better. That's just the only thing that makes it stand apart. The songwriting is just better. Right, for number 7, Symphony X. Symphony X would probably be my number 7. In terms of 3 favorite albums, for 2 and 3, it's a bit of a toss-up. It's a toss-up between The Divine Wings of Tragedy and Iconoclast. I'm gonna put Iconoclast third because I just really like it because it's the latest one. But yeah, Iconoclast, which is the latest one, and the expanded edition because you get all the songs. It's the double CD. It's supposed to be the real version of the album. So it's just a really good aggressive sounding Symphony X, and yeah, that's about it really for that one. Number 2 would then be The Divine Wings of Tragedy. Just it's got that just really progressive, that mix between progressive and metal, which obviously I'm a big fan of, and it's really varied. It's also got a big neoclassical element to it. You can really hear sort of the Yngwie or Uli John Roth influence in Michael Romeo's playing and sort of the licks and all that kind of thing. So that's my number 2 for Symphony X. And my number 1 is the last one, which was Paradise Lost. It's the first album I ever got from them. And it's a combination of what Iconoclast and Divine Wings of Tragedy have in common. It's really heavy, but it's still got a bit more of that progressive nature to it. I think anyways. You know, there's a lot more sort of riff variations. There's a lot of like sort of choir stuff, and it's really heavy, but it's got sort of that typical Symphony X element, which is missing a little bit on Iconoclast. But yeah, it's just got loads of fills, and Michael Romeo's soloing just gets better with every single album. These guys would have been in my top 5. For number 6 would have been my top 5 if I could fit it in. But there were just other bands I just had to put in my top 5, which is Nevermore. They were one of the main reasons I switched over to playing 7-string, and partially why Nevermore sounds the way it does. And also with the album This Godless Endeavor, that's where Endeavor got its name, as we've mentioned in a couple of different things recently. But This Godless Endeavor, however, is not in my top 3 albums from them. My top 3 albums would be, number 3 would be Enemies of Reality. It's just a really aggressive record. It starts off really aggressive and then kind of does a lot of experimenting in terms of song arrangement and stuff like that. So that's really cool to see. That sort of experimental thing that they like to do. Warrell Dane is probably one of my favorite vocalists ever, and Jeff Loomis is obviously one of my favorite guitarists ever. The thing about this album, it just has so many good riffs. I mean, from Enemies of Reality, Ambivalent, I Voyager, and Create the Infinite. They're just all really good riffs, and obviously it's all really good songwriting. So that's a really big favorite of mine. My number 2, once again I don't have here, is The Obsidian Conspiracy, the last Nevermore album, and it's just, that's really varied in terms of what it does. It's got some really heavy tracks. It's got like The Obsidian Conspiracy and The Termination Proclamation or Moonrise, but then it's got some really interesting songs like She Comes in Colors, You Build the Wall or something, I think it's called. And The Blue and the Marble Soul. It's just a really varied, diverse album, which is what I really like. A lot of people weren't big on the Obsidian Conspiracy, but one of my favorites. And my number one, this is probably the defining Nevermore album, is Dead Heart and a Dead World. It's the first Nevermore album I ever got, and it's just so heavy. Andy Sneap production, you know, can't go wrong with that. And every song, every riff, just everything about it is just balls to the walls. I mean, Narcosynthesis, Inside His Own Four Walls. It's a bit less varied, but even if it is less varied, the songs are just really, really, really strong. So, and the soloing is obviously awesome. So that's my 10 to 6 of my top 10 favorite metal bands of all time. Stay tuned for part 2, which I shall put up in a couple of days. So thanks for watching, guys. Bye.